It is a pleasure to have you with us at the English Story Journal. Grab a coffee, find a quiet spot, and let's get lost in the story. The caterpillar and Alice looked at each other. The caterpillar took its pipe out of its mouth and spoke in a sleepy voice. "Who are you?" said the caterpillar. Alice replied shyly, I don't really know, sir. Right now, at least, I know who I was this morning, but I think I have changed many times since then." "What do you mean?" said the caterpillar seriously. "Explain yourself." "I can't explain myself, I'm afraid, sir, because I'm not myself, you see." "I don't see," said the caterpillar. "I'm afraid I can't say it more clearly," Alice replied, "because I don't understand it myself. Being many different sizes in one day is very confusing." "It isn't," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe you haven't felt it yet," said Alice, "but when you have to turn into a chrysalis, you will someday, you know, and then after that into a butterfly, I think you'll feel it a little strange, won't you?" "Not a bit," said the caterpillar. "Well, maybe your feelings are different," said Alice. "All I know is it would feel very strange to me." "You?" said the caterpillar with no respect. "Who are you?" Alice felt angry at the caterpillar's short answers. She stood up and said, "I think you ought to tell me who you are first." "Why?" said the caterpillar. Alice could not think of a good reason. The caterpillar seemed unhappy, so Alice turned away. "Come back," the caterpillar called after her. "I've something important to say." Alice turned and came back. "Keep your temper," said the caterpillar. "Is that all?" said Alice, trying not to be angry. "No," said the caterpillar. Alice decided to wait. For some minutes it smoked quietly. Then it put down its arms, took the pipe out of its mouth again, and said, "So you think you're changed, do you?" "I'm afraid I am, sir," said Alice. "I can't remember things like I used to, and I don't stay the same size for 10 minutes. "Can't remember what things?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I've tried to say, 'How doth the little busy bee,' but it all came different," Alice replied sadly. "Repeat, 'You are old, Father William,'" said the caterpillar. Alice folded her hands and began. "You are old, Father William," the young man said, "and your hair has become very white, and yet you incessantly stand on your head. Do you think at your age it is right?" "In my youth," Father William replied to his son, "I feared it might injure the brain, but now that I'm perfectly sure I have none, why, I do it again and again." "You are old," said the youth, "as I mentioned before, and have grown most uncommonly fat, yet you turned a back somersault in at the door. Pray, what is the reason of that?" "In my youth," said the sage, as he shook his gray locks, "I kept all my limbs very supple by the use of this ointment, 1 shilling the box. Allow me to sell you a couple." "You are old," said the youth, "and your jaws are too weak for anything tougher than suet. Yet you finished the goose with the bones and the beak. Pray, how did you manage to do it?" "In my youth," said his father, "I took to the law and argued each case with my wife, and the muscular strength which it gave to my jaw has lasted the rest of my life." "You are old," said the youth. "One would hardly suppose that your eye was as steady as ever, yet you balanced an eel on the end of your nose. What made you so awfully clever?" "I have answered 3 questions, and that is enough," said his father. Don't give yourself airs. Do you think I can listen all day to such stuff? Be off, or I'll kick you downstairs." "That is not said right," said the caterpillar. "Not quite right, I'm afraid," Alice said a little shyly. "Some of the words have changed." "It is wrong from beginning to end," said the caterpillar strongly, and there was silence for some minutes. The caterpillar spoke first. "What size do you want to be?" it asked. "Oh, I don't care much about the size," Alice quickly replied. "Only I don't like changing so often, you know." "I don't know," said the caterpillar. Alice said nothing. She felt herself getting angry. "Are you content now?" said the caterpillar. "Well, I should like to be a little larger, sir, if you wouldn't mind," said Alice. 3 inches is such a bad height to be." "It is a very good height indeed," said the caterpillar angrily, standing up straight as it spoke. It was exactly 3 inches high. "But I'm not used to it," pleaded Alice sadly. She thought, "I wish the animals wouldn't get angry so easily." "You'll get used to it in time," said the caterpillar, and it put the pipe into its mouth and began smoking again. Alice waited. The caterpillar took the pipe out of its mouth. It yawned, shook itself, and then crawled off the mushroom into the grass. As it left, it said, "One side will make you grow taller, and the other side will make you grow shorter." "One side of what? The other side of what?" Alice thought. "Of the mushroom," said the caterpillar, just as if she had asked it out loud, and in another moment it was gone. Alice looked at the mushroom, thinking. She tried to find its 2 sides, but it was round. This was hard. At last she put her arms around it. She broke off a piece with each hand. "And now which is which?" she said to herself. She ate a little of the right-hand piece to see what would happen. The next moment she felt a strong hit under her chin. It had hit her foot. She was scared by this sudden change. She knew she had to act fast, as she was getting smaller. She started to eat some of the other piece. Her chin was pressed against her foot. There was almost no room to open her mouth, but she did it at last and swallowed a small piece. "Whew! My head is free at last," Alice said, happily. Then she was scared. She looked down and could not find her shoulders. All she saw was a very long neck growing from green leaves far below her. "What can all that green stuff be?" said Alice. "And where have my shoulders gone? And oh, my poor hands, why can't I see you?" She waved her hands, but nothing happened. The green leaves far away moved a little. She could not get her hands to her head, so she tried to get her head down to her hands. Her neck could bend easily like a snake. She made her neck bend down. She was about to go into the leaves, which were treetops. Then she heard a loud hiss and pulled back. A large pigeon had flown into her face. It was hitting her with its wings. "Serpent!" screamed the pigeon. "I'm not a serpent," Alice said angrily. "Leave me alone." "Serpent, I say again," repeated the pigeon, but in a quieter voice. It added sadly, "I've tried every way, and nothing seems to suit them." "I haven't the least idea what you're talking about," Alice said. "I've tried the roots of trees, and I've tried banks, and I've tried hedges," the pigeon went on, not listening to her. "But those serpents, they are never happy." Alice was confused. She waited until the pigeon finished speaking. "As if it wasn't trouble enough hatching the eggs," said the pigeon, "but I must be on the lookout for serpents night and day. Why, I haven't had any sleep these 3 weeks." "I'm very sorry you've been bothered," said Alice, who started to understand. "And just as I'd taken the highest tree in the wood," shouted the pigeon loudly, "and just as I was thinking I should be free of them at last, they must needs come wriggling down from the sky. Ugh, serpent!" "But I'm not a serpent, I tell you. I'm a... "Well, what are you?" said the pigeon. "I can see you're trying to invent something." I'm a little girl," said Alice, not sure as she remembered how many times she had changed that day. "A not true story indeed," said the pigeon in a rude voice. "I've seen a good many little girls in my time, but never one with such a neck as that. No, no, you're a serpent, and there's no use denying it. I suppose you'll be telling me next that you never tasted an egg." "I have tasted eggs, certainly," said Alice, who told the truth. "But little girls eat eggs quite as much as serpents do, you know." "I don't believe it," said the pigeon. "But if they do, why then they're a kind of serpent. That's all I can say." This was such a new idea to Alice that she was silent for a minute or two. This gave the pigeon the chance to add, "You're looking for eggs, I know that well enough. And what does it matter to me whether you're a little girl or a serpent?" "It matters a good deal to me," said Alice quickly, "but I'm not looking for eggs, actually, and if I was, I would not want yours. I don't like them raw." "Well, be off then," said the pigeon in an unhappy voice as it went back to its nest. Alice bent down among the trees. Her neck kept getting caught in the branches. She stopped often to free it. She remembered she still held the mushroom pieces. She started to eat carefully, first from one, then the other. She grew taller and shorter. At last, she was her normal size. She had not been her normal size for a long time. It felt strange, but she got used to it. She talked to herself. "Half my plan is done now. These changes are confusing. I don't know what I will be. But I'm back to my normal size. Next, I need to get into that beautiful garden. How is that to be done, I wonder?" As she spoke, she saw an open area with a small house, about 4 feet tall. "If I go there this big," Alice thought, "I will scare everyone." So she ate a little of the right-hand mushroom piece again. She did not go near the house until she was 9 inches tall. Alice stood looking at the house. She wondered what to do. Suddenly, a footman ran out of the wood. He wore a special uniform. Alice thought he looked like a fish. He knocked loudly on the door. Another footman opened it. This one had a round face and big eyes like a frog. Both footmen had white curly hair. Alice was very curious. She moved closer to listen. The fish footman took a big letter from under his arm. It was almost as big as him. He gave it to the other footman. He said in a serious voice, "For the Duchess, an invitation from the Queen to play croquet." The frog footman repeated, also in a serious voice, "From the Queen, an invitation for the Duchess to play croquet." Then they both bowed low. Their curly hair got stuck together. Alice laughed a lot. She ran back into the wood so they would not hear her. When she looked out again, the fish footman was gone. The other footman sat on the ground by the door. He looked up at the sky. Alice walked slowly to the door and knocked. "There's no use knocking," said the footman, "and for 2 reasons. First, I'm on the same side of the door as you. Second, they are making so much noise inside, no one can hear you." Alice could hear a very strange noise. There was howling and sneezing, and sometimes a loud crash, like a plate breaking. "Please, then," said Alice, "how can I get in?" "Maybe knocking would make sense," the footman continued, not looking at her, "if the door was between us. For example, if you were inside, you could knock and I could let you out." He looked at the sky the whole time. Alice thought this was rude. But maybe he can't help it, she thought. His eyes are so high on his head. But he could answer questions. "How can I get in?" she asked again, loudly. "I will sit here," said the footman, "until tomorrow." Just then, the door opened. A large plate flew out. It went straight at the footman's head. It just touched his nose and broke on a tree behind him. "Or maybe the next day," the footman went on, as if nothing had happened. "How can I get in?" Alice asked again, louder. "Are you supposed to get in?" said the footman. "That's the first question." Alice did not like this. "It's really bad," she said to herself. "All the creatures argue. It's enough to make you crazy." The footman seemed to like repeating what he said. "I will sit here," he said, "sometimes for many days." "But what should I do?" said Alice. "Anything you like," the footman said, and he started to whistle. "Oh, it's no use talking to him," Alice said sadly. "He is completely silly." She opened the door and went in. The door opened into a big kitchen. It was full of smoke. The Duchess sat on a stool in the middle holding a baby. The cook stood over the fire stirring a big pot of soup. "There is too much pepper in that soup," Alice said to herself, sneezing. There was too much pepper in the air. The Duchess sneezed sometimes. The baby sneezed and cried without stopping. Only the cook and a big cat did not sneeze. The cat sat by the fire and smiled from ear to ear. "Please tell me," said Alice, a little shyly, "why your cat smiles like that." "It's a Cheshire cat, and that's why." "Pig." The Duchess said "pig" very loudly. Alice jumped, but she saw the Duchess was talking to the baby, not to her, so Alice felt brave and spoke again. "I did not know that Cheshire cats always smiled. I did not know that cats could smile." "They all can," said the Duchess, "and most of them do." "I don't know any that do," Alice said politely. She was happy to talk. "You don't know much," said the Duchess. "That is true." Alice did not like what the Duchess said. She wanted to talk about something else. The cook took the pot off the fire. She started throwing everything she could find at the Duchess and the baby. First, metal tools from the fire, then pots, plates, and dishes. The Duchess did not care. The baby cried so much already. "Oh, please be careful," cried Alice. She was very scared. "Oh, his special nose!" A very big pot flew past the baby's nose and almost hit it. "If everyone thought about their own things," the Duchess said in a rough voice, "the world would move much faster." "That would not be good," Alice said. She was happy to show what she knew. "Think about day and night. The earth takes 24 hours to turn around." "Speaking of turning," the Duchess said, "cut off her head." Alice looked at the cook. She wondered if the cook would do it, but the cook was busy stirring the soup and did not seem to listen, so Alice went on. 24 hours, I think. Or is it 12? Oh, don't bother me," said the Duchess. "I hate numbers." She began to hold her baby again. She sang a song to it. She shook the baby hard at the end of every line. "Speak roughly to your little boy and beat him when he sneezes. He only does it to annoy because he knows it teases." Chorus. The cook and the baby sang too. "Wow, wow, wow." The Duchess sang the second part of the song. She threw the baby up and down very hard. The poor baby cried so much that Alice could hardly hear the words. I speak severely to my boy, I beat him when he sneezes, for he can thoroughly enjoy the pepper when he pleases. Chorus. Wow, wow, wow. Here, you can hold it for a bit if you like, the Duchess said to Alice. She threw the baby at her. I must go and get ready to play croquet with the Queen. The Duchess hurried out. The cook threw a frying pan after her, but it missed. Alice caught the baby. It was hard because the baby had a strange shape. Its arms and legs went in all directions, like a starfish, Alice thought. The baby made loud noises like a train. It kept bending itself up and then straight again. For the first few minutes, Alice could barely hold it. Alice found a way to hold it. She twisted it into a kind of knot and held its right ear and left foot. Then she carried it outside. If I don't take this baby with me, Alice thought, they will kill it soon. It would be wrong to leave it here. She said this out loud. The baby made a grunting sound. It had stopped sneezing now. Don't grunt. That is not a good way to talk. The baby grunted again. Alice looked closely at its face. It had a very short, turned-up nose like a pig's snout. Its eyes were also getting very small for a baby. Alice did not like how it looked, but maybe it was just crying, she thought. She looked for tears. No, there were no tears. If you are going to turn into a pig, my dear, Alice said seriously, I will not help you any more. Be careful. The poor little thing cried again, or grunted, she could not tell. They walked in silence for a while. Alice started to think, what will I do with this creature when I get home? Then it grunted again, very loudly. Alice looked at its face, worried. This time she saw it clearly. It was a pig. She knew it was silly to carry it any more, so she put the little pig down. She felt happy to see it walk quietly into the wood. If it had grown up, she said to herself, it would have been a very ugly child, but it is a handsome pig, I think. She began to think about other children she knew who might make good pigs. She was just saying to herself, if only one knew how to change them, when she saw the Cheshire Cat. It was sitting on a tree branch nearby. The cat only smiled when it saw Alice. It looked friendly, she thought, but it had very long claws and many teeth, so Alice felt she should be polite. Cheshire Puss, she began, a little shyly. She did not know if the cat would like the name, but it only smiled a little wider. Good, it's happy so far, Alice thought. She went on. Please, can you tell me which way I should go from here? That depends a lot on where you want to go, said the cat. I don't care much where, said Alice. Then it does not matter which way you go, said the cat. As long as I get somewhere, Alice added to explain. Oh, you will surely do that, said the cat, if you just walk long enough. Alice knew this was true, so she tried another question. What kind of people live around here? In that direction, the cat said, moving its right paw, lives a hatter, and in that direction, moving its other paw, lives a March hare. Visit anyone you like. They are both crazy. But I don't want to go among crazy people, Alice said. Oh, you cannot help that, the cat said. We are all crazy here. I am crazy. You are crazy. How do you know I'm crazy? Said Alice. You must be, the cat said, or you would not have come here. Alice did not think that proved it, but she went on. And how do you know that you are crazy? First, the cat said, a dog is not crazy. You agree? I suppose so, said Alice. Well then, the cat went on, a dog growls when it is angry. It wags its tail when it is happy. Now I growl when I am happy, and I wag my tail when I am angry, so I am crazy. I call it purring, not growling, said Alice. Call it what you like. Do you play croquet with the Queen today? I would like that very much, said Alice, but I have not been invited yet. You will see me there, the cat said, and it disappeared. Alice was not very surprised. She was used to strange things now. She looked at the empty space. Then the cat suddenly appeared again. By the way, what happened to the baby? Said the cat. I almost forgot to ask. It turned into a pig, Alice said softly, as if it was normal. I thought it would, said the cat, and disappeared again. Alice waited, thinking the cat might come back, but it did not. After a minute or two, she walked towards where the March Hare lived. I have seen hatters before, she said to herself. The March Hare will be more interesting, and maybe since it is May, he will not be so very crazy, not as crazy as in March. As she said this, she looked up. The cat was there again, sitting on a tree branch. Did you say pig or fig? Said the cat. I said pig, Alice answered, and I wish you would not keep appearing and disappearing so suddenly. You make me feel dizzy. All right, said the cat. This time it disappeared slowly. It started with its tail and ended with its smile. The smile stayed for some time after the rest of the cat was gone. Well, I have often seen a cat without a smile, Alice thought, but a smile without a cat? It is the strangest thing I have ever seen. She walked a little farther and saw the March Hare's house. She knew it was the right house because the chimneys looked like ears. The roof was made of fur. It was a very big house. Alice did not want to go closer. She ate more of the mushroom and became about 2 feet tall. Even then she walked towards it a little shyly. She said to herself, "What if it is very crazy after all? I almost wished I had gone to see the Hatter instead." Under a tree, the March Hare and Hatter had tea. A dormouse sat between them, asleep. The others used it as a cushion, talking over its head. Very uncomfortable for the dormouse, thought Alice, but as it's asleep, I suppose it doesn't mind. The table was big, but they sat close together. "No room, no room," they cried when they saw Alice coming. "There's plenty of room," said Alice, a little angry. She sat in a big chair at one end of the table. "Have some wine," said the March Hare. Alice looked around. Only tea was on the table. "I don't see any wine," she said. "There isn't any," said the March Hare. "Then it wasn't very kind of you to offer it," said Alice angrily. "It wasn't very kind of you to sit down without being invited," said the March Hare. "I didn't know it was your table," said Alice. "It's set for many more than 3. "Your hair wants cutting," said the Hatter. He looked at Alice with curiosity. It was his first speech. "You should learn not to say things like that," said Alice. "It's very rude." The Hatter opened his eyes wide, but all he said was, "Why is a raven like a writing desk?" "Now we will have some fun," thought Alice. "I'm glad they started asking riddles. I think I can guess that," she said aloud. "Do you mean that you think you can find out the answer to it?" said the March Hare. "Exactly so," said Alice. "Then you should say what you mean," the March Hare went on. "I do. At least, I mean what I say. That's the same thing, you know." "Not the same thing a bit," said the Hatter. "You might just as well say that I see what I eat is the same thing as I eat what I see. You might just as well say," added the March Hare, who seemed to be talking in his sleep, "that I breathe when I sleep is the same thing as I sleep when I breathe." "It is the same thing with you," said the Hatter. The talk stopped. Everyone was quiet. Alice thought about ravens and writing desks, but knew little. The Hatter spoke first. "What day is it?" he said, turning to Alice. He took his watch, shaking it often. Alice thought a little, then said, "The 4th. 2 days wrong," the Hatter sighed. "I told you butter wouldn't work in it," he added, looking angry at the March Hare. "It was the best butter, you know," the March Hare replied softly. "Yes, but crumbs got in," the Hatter grumbled. "You shouldn't have put it in with the bread knife." The March Hare took the watch, looked sadly, then dipped it in his tea. He looked again, but said, "It was the best butter, you know." Alice looked over his shoulder. "What a funny watch," she said. "It tells the day, but not the time." "Why should it?" the Hatter mumbled. "Does your watch tell you the year?" "Of course not," Alice replied quickly, "but that's because the year stays the same for a long time, which is just the case with mine," said the Hatter. Alice was puzzled. The Hatter's words had no meaning. "I don't quite understand you," she said as politely as she could. "The Dormouse is asleep again," said the Hatter. He poured a little hot tea on its nose. The Dormouse shook its head, annoyed. Without opening its eyes, it said, of course, just what I was going to say myself." "Have you guessed the riddle yet?" the Hatter said, turning to Alice. "No, I give it up," Alice replied. "What's the answer?" "I haven't the slightest idea," said the Hatter. "Nor I," said the March Hare. Alice sighed tiredly. "I think you could do something better with your time," she said, "than ask riddles that have no answers." "If you knew time as well as I do," said the Hatter, "you wouldn't talk about wasting it. It's him." "I don't know what you mean," said Alice. "Of course you don't," the Hatter said. "I bet you never even spoke to time." "Perhaps not," Alice replied, "but I know I have to beat time when I learn music." "Ah, that's why," said the Hatter. "He won't let you beat him. If you were friends with him, he'd do almost anything you liked with the clock. For example, imagine it was 9 o'clock in the morning, time for lessons. You'd just whisper a hint to time, and the clock would quickly move. 1:30, time for dinner." "I only wish it was," the March Hare whispered. "That would be great," said Alice, "but then I wouldn't be hungry, you know." "Not at first, perhaps, but you could keep it to 1:30 as long as you liked." "Is that the way you manage?" Alice asked. The Hatter shook his head sadly. "Not I," he replied. "We argued last March, just before he went mad, you know." He pointed his teaspoon at the March Hare. "It was at the big concert for the Queen of Hearts, and I had to sing 'Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Bat, How I Wonder What You're At.' You know the song, perhaps." "I've heard something like it," Alice said. "It goes on, you know," the Hatter continued, "in this way. Up above the world you fly, like a tea tray in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle." The Dormouse shook itself and began singing. They pinched it to stop. "Well, I had just finished the first part," said the Hatter, "when the Queen jumped up and shouted, 'He's killing the time! Cut off his head!'" "How very mean!" exclaimed Alice. "And since that time," the Hatter went on, "he won't do anything I ask. It's always 6 o'clock now." Alice had an idea. "Is that why so many tea things are here?" she asked. "Yes, that's it," said the Hatter with a sigh. "It's always tea time, and we have no time to wash the things." "Then you keep moving, I suppose?" Alice asked. "Exactly so," said the Hatter, "as the things get used up." "But what happens when you come to the start again?" Alice asked carefully. "Let's change the topic," said the March Hare, yawning. "I'm tired of this. I think the young lady should tell us a story." "I'm afraid I don't know one," Alice said, worried by the idea. Then the Dormouse shall, they both cried. Wake up, Dormouse, and they pinched it on both sides at once. The Dormouse slowly opened his eyes. I wasn't asleep, he said in a rough, weak voice. I heard every word you were saying. Tell us a story, said the March Hare. Yes, please do, pleaded Alice. And be quick about it, added the Hatter, or you'll be asleep again before it's done. Once upon a time there were 3 little sisters. Their names were Elsie, Lacie, and Tilly. They lived at the bottom of a well. What did they eat? Alice asked. She always cared a lot about food and drink. They lived on treacle, the Dormouse said after thinking a minute or two. They couldn't have done that, you know, Alice said. They'd have been sick. So they were, said the Dormouse, very sick. Alice tried to imagine this strange life, but it puzzled her. She asked, but why did they live at the bottom of a well? Have some more tea, the March Hare said to Alice. I've had nothing yet, Alice replied, so I can't take more. You mean you can't take less, said the Hatter. It's very easy to take more than nothing. Nobody asked your opinion, Alice said. Who is saying rude things now? The Hatter asked. Alice did not know what to say. She took some tea and bread and butter. Then she turned to the Dormouse and asked her question again. Why did they live at the bottom of a well? The Dormouse again took a minute or two to think about it and then said, It was a treacle well. There's no such thing, Alice began angrily, but the Hatter and the March Hare went, Shh, shh. The Dormouse said, annoyed, If you can't be kind, you'd better finish the story yourself. No, please go on, Alice said. I won't stop you again. I suppose there may be one. One indeed, said the Dormouse, but he agreed to go on. And so these 3 little sisters, they were learning to draw, you know. What did they draw? Alice asked. She forgot her promise. Treacle, said the Dormouse, without thinking this time. I want a clean cup, interrupted the Hatter. Let's all move one place on. He moved as he spoke. The Dormouse followed. The March Hare moved, and Alice unwillingly took his place. The Hatter gained. Alice was worse off as the March Hare had just poured the milk jug into his plate. Alice did not want to make the Dormouse angry again, so she began very carefully. But I don't understand. Where did they draw the treacle from? You can draw water out of a water well, said the Hatter, so I should think you could draw a treacle out of a treacle well, eh, stupid? But they were in the well, Alice said to the Dormouse, ignoring the Hatter. Of course they were, said the Dormouse, well in. This answer confused Alice so much she let the Dormouse talk for some time without stopping it. They were learning to draw, the Dormouse went on. It yawned and rubbed its eyes because it was very sleepy, and they drew all kinds of things, everything that begins with an M. Why with an M? Alice asked. Why not? Said the March Hare. Alice was silent. The Dormouse closed its eyes, falling asleep. The Hatter pinched it. It woke with a cry and went on. That begins with an M, such as mousetraps and the moon and memory and muchness. You know, you say things are much of a muchness. Did you ever see such a thing as a drawing of a muchness? Really, now you ask me, I don't think. Then you shouldn't talk, said the Hatter. This rudeness was too much for Alice. She got up and walked away. Dormouse fell asleep. Others did not notice her leave. She looked back, hoping for a call. Last, she saw them trying to put Dormouse into the teapot. I will never go there again, Alice said, walking through the wood. It's the most foolish tea party I have ever been to. She saw a tree with a door. That's very strange, she thought. Everything is strange today. I should go in. She entered. In the hall, near the glass table, now I'll do better, she thought. She took the golden key and unlocked the door to the garden. She ate mushroom, kept in her pocket, until she was a foot high. She walked down the passage, and then she was in the beautiful garden with bright flowers and cool fountains. Near the garden door, a white rose tree stood. 3 gardeners were painting its roses red. Alice thought this was strange and went closer to watch. Just as she came near, she heard one gardener say, "Watch out, Five! Don't splash paint on me like that." "I couldn't help it," said Five, sounding a bit angry. "Seven hit my arm." Then Seven looked up and said, "That's right, Five. Always blame others." "You should not talk," said Five. "I heard the Queen say yesterday you should lose your head." "Why?" asked the gardener who spoke first. "That's not your business, Two," said Seven. "Yes, it is his business," said Five, "and I will tell him it was for bringing the cook tulip roots instead of onions." Seven threw down his brush. He started to say, "Well, of all the unfair things," but then he saw Alice watching them. He stopped quickly. The others also looked around. All of them bowed low. "Can you tell me," Alice said a little shyly, "why you are painting those roses?" Five and Seven said nothing. They looked at Two. Two began in a low voice. "Well, miss, this tree should have been a red rose tree. We put a white one in by mistake. If the Queen finds out, we will all lose our heads, you know. So, miss, we are trying our best before she comes to—" At that moment, Five, who had been looking across the garden, shouted, "The Queen! The Queen!" The 3 gardeners quickly lay flat on their faces. Alice heard many footsteps. She looked around, wanting to see the Queen. First came 10 soldiers carrying clubs. Next came 10 courtiers with diamonds on them. They walked 2 by 2. After them came the 10 royal children. They jumped happily, holding hands, and all had hearts on them. Next came the guests, mostly kings and queens. Alice saw the White Rabbit. He was talking quickly and nervously. He walked past without seeing her. Then came the Knave of Hearts, carrying the king's crown. Last came the King and Queen of Hearts. Alice was not sure if she should lie down like the gardeners, but she thought, what good is a parade if people lie down and can't see it? So she stood still. When the parade came to Alice, everyone stopped and looked at her. The Queen said strictly, "Who is this?" She said it to the knave. He only bowed and smiled. "Idiot," said the Queen. She shook her head. Then turning to Alice, she went on, "What's your name, child?" "My name is Alice, please, Your Majesty," Alice said very politely, but she added to herself, "They are only a pack of cards after all. I don't need to be afraid of them." "And who are these?" said the Queen. She pointed to the 3 gardeners lying around the rose tree. Because they were lying on their faces, the Queen could not tell if they were gardeners, soldiers, courtiers, or her own children. "How should I know?" Alice said. She was surprised at her own bravery. "It's not my business." The Queen turned red with anger. She stared at Alice like a wild animal for a moment. Then she screamed, "Off with her head! Off!" "Nonsense," said Alice very loudly and clearly. The Queen became quiet. The king put his hand on her arm. He said shyly, "Think, my dear, she is only a child." The queen turned angrily away from him. She said to the knave, "Turn them over." The knave did so very carefully with one foot. "Get up," said the queen in a sharp, loud voice. The 3 gardeners instantly jumped up. They began bowing to the king, the queen, the royal children, and everyone else. "Stop that!" screamed the queen. "You make me dizzy." Then, turning to the rose tree, she went on, "What have you been doing here?" "May it please your majesty," said Tu in a very humble voice. He went down on one knee as he spoke. "We were trying—" "I see," said the queen. She had been looking at the roses. "Off with their heads." The parade moved on. 3 soldiers stayed behind to kill the poor gardeners. The gardeners ran to Alice for help. "You won't lose your heads," said Alice. She put them into a big flower pot nearby. The 3 soldiers looked for them. Then they marched off. "Are their heads off?" shouted the queen. "Their heads are gone, if it pleases your majesty," the soldiers shouted back. "That's right," shouted the queen. "Can you play croquet?" The soldiers were silent. They looked at Alice as the question was for her. "Yes," shouted Alice. "Come on, then," roared the queen. Alice joined the parade. She wondered very much what would happen next. It's a very nice day," said a shy voice next to her. She was walking by the white rabbit. He was looking closely at her face. "Very," said Alice. "Where is the Duchess?" "Hush, hush," said the rabbit in a low, fast voice. He put his mouth close to her ear and whispered, "She is going to be executed." "Why?" said Alice. "Did you say, 'What a pity'?" the rabbit asked. "No, I didn't. I don't think it's a pity at all. I said, 'What for?'" "She hit the queen's ears," began the rabbit. Alice laughed a little. "Oh, hush," the rabbit whispered in a scared voice. "The queen will hear you." You see, she came quite late, and the queen said, "Get to your places," shouted the queen in a very loud voice. People started running everywhere. They bumped into each other, but they settled down in a minute or two. The game began. Alice thought she had never seen such a strange croquet ground. The balls were live hedgehogs. The mallets were live flamingos. The soldiers had to bend over to make the arches. The main problem Alice had was controlling her flamingo. She held its body under her arm, but often when she aimed to hit the hedgehog, the flamingo would twist its neck and look at her. It looked so confused she had to laugh. Then, when she got its head down, the hedgehog would unroll itself and crawl away. Also, the ground was uneven, and the soldiers who made the arches often moved. Alice soon decided it was a very difficult game. All the players played at once without waiting. They argued and fought for the hedgehogs. Soon the queen became very angry. She stamped about, shouting, "Off with his head," or "Off with her head," often. Alice began to feel very worried. She had not argued with the queen yet, but she knew it could happen any minute. And then she thought, what would happen to me? They love to cut off people's heads here. It's a wonder anyone is still alive. She looked for a way to escape without being seen. Then she saw a strange thing in the air. It puzzled her at first, but after watching it for a minute or two, she saw it was a grin. She said to herself, "It's the Cheshire Cat. Now I will have someone to talk to." "How are you doing?" said the cat as soon as its mouth appeared. Alice waited for the eyes. She thought, No use talking until its ears come. Soon the whole head appeared. Alice put down her flamingo. She began to tell about the game, glad to have someone listen. The cat did not show any more of itself. "I don't think they play fairly," Alice began. "They argue so much you can't hear yourself. There are no rules or no one follows them, and it's confusing with all the things alive. For example, the arch I need to go through is walking away, and I should have hit the queen's hedgehog, but it ran away when it saw mine coming." "How do you like the queen?" said the cat in a low voice. "Not at all," Alice said. "She's so very—" Just then she saw that the queen was close behind her, listening, so she went on, "Likely to win, that it's hardly worth finishing the game." The queen smiled and walked on. "Who are you talking to?" said the king. He walked up to Alice and looked at the cat's head with great interest. "It's a friend of mine, a Cheshire cat. Let me introduce it." "I don't like how it looks at all," said the king. "However, it may kiss my hand if it wants." "I'd rather not," the cat said. "Don't be rude," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He moved behind Alice. "A cat may look at a king," Alice said. "I've read that in some book, but I don't remember where." "Well, it must be taken away," said the king very strongly. He called the queen, who was passing at that moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way to solve all problems, big or small. "Off with his head," she said, without even looking around. "I'll get the executioner myself," said the king eagerly. He hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going. She heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming angrily. She had already heard her order 3 players to be killed for missing their turns. She did not like how things looked at all. The game was so messy that she never knew if it was her turn or not, so she went to find her hedgehog. The hedgehog was fighting another hedgehog. Alice thought this was a good chance to hit them, but her flamingo was on the other side of the garden trying to fly into a tree. When she caught the flamingo, the fight was over. The hedgehogs were gone. "It doesn't matter," thought Alice, "as the arches are gone." She put the flamingo under her arm so it would not escape and went back to talk to her friend. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, a crowd was around it. The executioner, king, and queen were arguing, all talking at once. Everyone else was quiet and looked uncomfortable. When Alice appeared, all 3 asked her to solve the problem. They repeated their arguments, but all spoke at once. She found it hard to understand them. The executioner said you could not cut off a head without a body. He had never done it before and would not start now. The king said anything with a head could lose its head. He told them not to talk nonsense. The queen said if something was not done quickly, she would kill everyone. This made everyone look serious and worried. Alice could think of nothing else to say but, "It belongs to the Duchess. You should ask her about it." "She's in prison," the queen said to the executioner. "Bring her here." And the executioner left very fast. The cat's head began to disappear when he left. By the time he came back with the Duchess, it was gone. The king and executioner ran looking for it. The rest went back to the game. Thank you for spending time with us. I hope this story brought you peace and reflection. We will see you soon.